Sounds good. Let's do it, Josh.
I'll begin with the opening statement and then turn it over to you.
Perfect.
Good evening and welcome to the Boise City Design Review Committee meeting. A few things to start out with for tonight's proceedings. Everyone from the public entering the hearing has been automatically muted and cannot speak. As the item you're interested in comes up for discussion, you will be called upon and promoted to panelist. You will briefly leave the meeting and then rejoin with the ability to speak. There is a chat function in Zoom. This is not part of the record and should only be used if technical difficulties arise. If the chat function isn't available for you, you can email zoninginfo@cityofboise.org with any technical issues. Our procedures for public hearings begin with a presentation from the planning team. Then we'll go to the applicant and then the representative of the Registered Neighborhood Association, if present, followed by questions from the commission. After that, we will proceed to public testimony, starting with those who signed up on the online sign-up sheet in advance, and then anyone else who raises their hand virtually. If you are attending through your telephone, you can type in *9 to raise your hand. Each member of the public is allowed up to 3 minutes for testimony. We are strict with this time as it is limited in code. Finally, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal, after which the hearing will be closed and the commission will deliberate and render a decision. Tonight's agenda and proceedings will be almost the same as in-person hearings, except there might be a bit of a delay as we move through this technology. Please be courteous and patient with us while we venture through this virtual format. And with that, Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Josh. I would like to call the October 14th, 2020 Design Review Committee meeting to order. We are the citizen volunteers appointed by the mayor and approved by City Council. We make final decisions on design review permits. Any decision made tonight may be appealed to Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission, provided that the appeal is filed within 10 days of this hearing. In order to file an appeal, you must have given written or oral testimony at tonight's meeting. So that's why it's important to give your name and address when you testify tonight. We utilize a consent agenda. This means that if the applicant agrees with the staff report and there is no public opposition, the item will be placed on the consent agenda. All items that are placed on the consent agenda are approved with one motion without further public comment. For items not on the consent agenda, we will hold a full public hearing in the order on the agenda with staff, applicant, neighborhood association, and then public testimony. Thank you for all virtually attending tonight. And Victoria, will you please call the roll?
Semple.
Here.
Rudine.
Here.
Marsh.
Here.
Aguilar.
Here.
Zuckerman.
Here.
5 present, 2 absent.
Thank you. And at this time, I would take a motion on the September 9th, 2020 minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I move that we accept the September 9th, 2020 minutes as presented.
Thank you, Ms. Rudine.
Mr. Chair.
Second.
Sorry. Mr. Chair, I'll be
Yes.
abstaining. I was not at the last meeting.
Thank you. And also, I will be abstaining as I was not at the last meeting.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I will also be abstaining. I was not at the last hearing.
Okay. Did we get a second somewhere? Did I hear a second?
Yes, second.
Thank you, Secretary. And with that, Victoria, will you please call the roll?
Rudine. Rudine.
Yes.
Zuckerman.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right, thank you very much. We do have one item that is up for deferral tonight. That item is number 5 on the agenda, DRH 20-00408. Location is 10026 North Eisenman Road. It's to construct a trucking facility with a convenience store building, fuel pumps, and associated site improvements on a property located in an M2D zone. This would be deferred to the November 18th meeting. Is there any member of the audience wishing to speak on this item who cannot make that November 18th date? If this is true, please virtually raise your hand. Seeing no hands being raised, that concludes our items for deferral, and I would take a motion on the deferral.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Reedy.
I move that DRA 20-00408 be deferred to the November 18th meeting.
Okay, so moved.
Second.
And a second, thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Victoria, will you please call the roll?
Semple,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Marsh,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. The first item that we are considering for tonight's consent agenda is item number 2, DRH 20-00317. The location is 615 North Pierce Street. It's to construct a new family residence with waiver requests on a substandard lot of record without alley access in an R1C zone. Is the applicant present? If you are, please virtually raise your hand. I see a raised hand. Thank you. And are you in agreement with the recommended conditions of approval? If you are, please.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item? If so, please virtually raise your hand. I see no raised hands, so this item will be moved to the consent agenda. Second item to be considered for tonight's consent agenda is item number 3. It's DRH 20-00316. The location is 6406 West Gowan Road. It's for the construction of two-story industrial buildings totaling approximately 54,200 square feet with associated site improvements on a property located in M1D zone. Is the applicant present? Please virtually raise your hand. Josh, have you seen any hands raised? I do not see that the applicant is present.
Mr. Chairman, I do not. I'll check with Caitlin here to see. She said that they are in agreement. It does not appear they are present, though.
Okay, thank you very much. Please let the record show the applicant is in attendance, but isn't in favor per staff comments. Is there any member of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item tonight? If you are, please virtually raise your hand. I see no raised hands, and in this case, since that is the case, this item will also be moved to the consent agenda. That concludes our items to be heard or considered for our consent agenda. So I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Reedy.
I move that we accept the consent agenda items presented that you've put on the consent agenda, including the recommended findings of fact and conclusions of law noted in each project report.
So moved.
Second.
And seconded. Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Victoria, will you please call the roll?
Semple,
Aye.
Rudine.
Aye.
Marsh,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you very much. The first item to be heard tonight is item number 1. It's CVA 20-00008. Location is 702 West Idaho Street. The variance to exceed the maximum background area for a proposed wall sign in a C5 DDC zone. Caitlin, can you have the report?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. This is a sign variance request in the Capitol Boulevard Special Design Review District. And the process for these is that the Design Review Committee forwards a recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that Planning and Zoning Commission is tentatively scheduled for November 9th. So this will be a recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And the subject property is at the corner of Idaho Street and Capitol Boulevard. It is the Key Bank building. So the red is the subject parcel, and then they also have an attached parking garage, but that is on a separate parcel. So here is a view as if you're standing in front of City Hall on Capitol Boulevard looking towards the Capitol building. And here is the subject building, and this is Idaho Street. And this is the subject sign that they would like to replace. And the existing sign was approved in 2010. And from our documentation on that sign, it does conform with the current standards, which limit the sign area to 65 square feet in the Capitol Boulevard overlay. And this sign is approximately 60 square feet. So here we have the existing sign. You see the Key Bank words are above the Key logo, and they would like to refresh the sign to be to match their current branding. And the Key Bank you can see is in front of the Key now, and both the Key Bank words and the Key logo are proposed to be larger than the existing sign, but they don't come any closer to that Capitol Boulevard corridor. They're the same distance away from that building edge. And then here is the proposed sign. So it's approximately 44 feet long and approximately 7 feet tall. And here is just an outline of the Capitol Boulevard Special Design Overlay. So you can see it's about a block on either side of Capitol Boulevard. And within that district, there are special sign requirements. And the applicant is asking for a variance to number 2 there, that the wall signs shall not exceed 15% of the wall area in size or 65 square feet, whichever is less. I'll just go back here. So their proposal is 277 square feet. So that would exceed that maximum of 65 square feet. And then we also have the variance criteria for approving a variance. So there's variance criteria that apply to all variances. And then there are variance criteria for signs specifically. So we can just go through these quick. So a variance has to meet 1, 2, and 3 of B. So there's either a hardship associated with the property itself or an exceptional circumstance relating to the intended use of the property that is not generally applicable to the district. And then we have granting of the variance will not be in conflict with the comprehensive plan and will not affect a change in zoning, and that granting the variance will not be materially detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare, or injurious to the property or improvements of other property owners or the quiet enjoyment thereof. So all 3 of those have to be met in order to approve a variance. And then as well, we have the special sign variance criteria. So a sign variance may not be applied to a sign that is prohibited. So this is a wall sign, which is an allowed sign type. So that one they will have met. And then non-conforming signs in the vicinity surrounding the subject site may not be used as justification for a special circumstance. So we can't look at other signs nearby that are non-conforming in order to support the variance. So if we just go through these, that first one, that there's either a hardship associated with the property itself or an exceptional circumstance, and it can't be applicable to the district in general. It has to be something that's site specific. So the applicant has pointed out that the other development in the area blocks their visibility, which is important for their signage, that the sign is small in comparison to the large building facade, and that the proposed sign will not be more visible from the Capitol Boulevard corridor than the existing sign. So the applicant has kind of put together a little map here that shows where the building signage is and is not visible. So you can see that generally from to the east and the west, that's the more visible areas. And then they also have some photos they've kind of pointed out to see how visible the sign is from different areas. So from the Boise Depot, this is kind of an iconic view that we try to keep not cluttered looking, and we want to preserve the view of the Capitol. So you can see the Key Bank building is not visible from here. So the existing sign or the proposed sign is not visible. And then by the time you get in front of City Hall, that's when the sign is visible. So from in front of City Hall, you'd see the sign here will look larger because this entire facade here is visible. And then we have on the connector, Key Bank building is right about here, so probably not very visible. And then this is from 9th Street. So this position is probably visible, but you're quite a distance away. And then they have a photo taken from Idaho Street at night. So the existing sign is lit, and they are proposing that the new sign also be lit. And then here's a view from Main and 5th Street, and you can see it's visible, but you're pretty far away. And then that second variance criteria, that granting of the variance will not be in conflict with the comprehensive plan and will not affect a change in zoning. The applicant didn't go too much into this in their application materials, but gateway streets are pointed out in our comprehensive plan to enhance the area and overall character. And then the design standards intend to limit signage to reduce visual clutter and enhance the pedestrian environment. So staff didn't see that they really provided enough information for us to make that finding. And then the third is the granting of the variance will not be materially detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare. There are residential condos across Idaho Street. And we did receive a couple comments just concerned mainly about the light. And I think we didn't have this information when putting the packet together, but I think the applicant has more information about what they're willing to do with the lighting. And then of course the larger sign is going to just be more visually intrusive than the existing sign. So based on this analysis, we're recommending that we forward a recommendation of denial to the Planning and Zoning Commission, just on the fact that there wasn't enough information provided that shows those variance findings were clearly met. But I think the applicant does have some more information available, so maybe they can clarify some of that further. And then alternatively, you can forward a recommendation of approval of the sign as it's proposed, and then you'd need to clearly state how those variance findings are met. Or you can forward a recommendation of approval of the sign variance with some additional conditions. Again, just show how those findings are going to be met. And then I think the applicant is here and can maybe add some extra information and points.
Great. Thank you very much. Any questions at the moment here for staff?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Reedy.
can I request of the staff, I know that the square footage and the signing, amount of signage along Capitol Boulevard has been updated at some point. Could you tell me when the last time it was updated?
Yes, what I found was that in 98, I believe 1998, we had the 65 square foot. So at that point, this building did exist. So we did have some taller buildings in the area. And that's when we had the 65 square feet called out.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff at the moment? Hearing none, is the applicant present? If you would, please virtually raise your hand. Oh, I see Mike. And as soon as you're able to speak, Mike, if you would please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening. This is Mike Dardis. I'm with Image National Signs, and our address is 16265 Star Road in Nampa, Idaho.
Thank you. Yeah, feel free to present or have any other items that you want to address at this time.
Okay, thank you. Yes, KeyBank would like to update the existing sign to match their current linear logo. And in doing so, provide a little bit more visibility to that sign. Currently, the existing sign is primarily visible from the east due to the stacked format of that sign. With the newer linear sign, it would be visible more from the east and the west. In doing so, that would provide more visibility and generally speaking, advertisement for KeyBank. With the new mural that's been painted on the west side of the building, there's a lot of photography that's being, or photographs that are being taken of the building. And with the new layout, they would certainly be in some of those images, some of those photographs that are being taken. Thus, that'd be an advantage to them and keep them relevant and competing with other banks in the area. The sign, let me qualify that. The existing sign is 8'1" overall in height. The new sign would be 7'11". So the overall height of the new sign and the existing sign are comparable. It's just that the new sign would be longer. As far as the impact on the downtown corridor, it's, I guess our hardship is essentially the same as the advantage when it comes to the impact on the corridor, and that would be limited. With the building across the street, the Tower Plaza blocking our primary sign area, the overall visibility is limited unless you're, again, coming from the east or the west. As far as the illumination goes of the sign, we are able to or willing to concede and limit the hours of illumination. Perhaps we turn off the sign at 11 p.m. and it comes back on at 5 a.m. or something along those lines. We understand that there's condos across the street and the residents there have some concerns. As previously noted, there's no increased visibility of the sign from the Capitol corridor, Capitol Boulevard. And that, I think, is about it. Any questions for me?
Questions for the committee to the applicant?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Regan.
Mr. Dardis, you talked about limiting the hours for the sign being lit. The new sign will have X amount of light being pumped out of it, foot candles or whatever. How does that compare to what the existing sign has?
Actually, the nit level or illumination level will be comparable to what's there now. This new sign will not be brighter.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So a question for the applicant also. What do you currently limit the hours that that the current sign is illuminated?
It's the current sign's illuminated from dusk to dawn all night long.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can I go ahead? Would you be willing to turn off the sign a little bit like earlier, something like 10 to 6? 11 to 5 sounds a little bit harsh for something that's illuminated directly across from condos.
I understand your point, and I do think that's valid, and I think we can concede and do that, yes.
Other questions for the applicant? Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Curtis. This time, is there any member of the neighborhood association present tonight? If you would please virtually raise your hand. Seeing none, I don't believe there's any sign-up sheet on this one. Is there, Josh, for those that have signed up to testify?
Mr. Chairman, no, there is not.
Okay. This time I'd open it up for anybody else and members of the public that wish to testify in opposition to this application. If so, please virtually raise your hand. See no hands being raised, so apparently no adverse testimony for tonight. Any last things from the applicant that you want to state prior to closing the public portion of the testimony?
No, I would just like to emphasize that the overall design of the sign is consistent with their logo and the displays that they've installed in other cities across the country. They are, again, just trying to remain a viable business and community partner in the city of Boise and gain some advertisement, if you will, with larger signage. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, with that, we'll close the public portion of the testimony and bring it back to the committee for comment and discussion. So with that, we did get the one, some information from the public wishing that they weren't necessarily not in support of the sign, but they did wish to have the hours limited to, as you had mentioned, Dana, from like 10 till 6. Applicant seems to be in agreement with that. Other items that they kind of listed, it seems like their variance was due to the height of the buildings for the wall facing direction facing south on Capitol, that there is very limited visibility to that sign, and that's their main variance, that it has limited distance. It doesn't seem to have a real impact to pedestrians that I could see, since it's at such a height on a large building. Any other thoughts or questions from concerns from the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Ms. Sutton.
looking at the current sign and the proposed sign is far more in scale with the building than the current sign, which honestly looks a little bit dinky, for lack of a better term. And I agree that there's no adverse consequences to putting up a larger sign. And I can see why the applicant wants to have a larger sign. You really can't see that, the current sign, from any distance, and you definitely cannot see it from the street below. It took me a few years to realize that that was the Key Bank building that people were referring to, because the sign is just not visible. So I would fully support the proposed sign.
Thank you. Quick question to staff. The west-facing wall that has a mural on it now, did that previously have signage on it recently for Key Bank?
Mr. Chairman, I do not believe there was any signage on that side.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Jessica.
I'm not in support of granting the variance we have a lot of new structures that are getting built and getting into the skyline here. And over time, as these new structures are added, their sign packages are going to come in. And I think it's really important that we are consistent with the current standards and requirements. Now, if staff, planning and zoning council at some point want to revisit the sign ordinance, then maybe the ordinance should be revised. But I don't think it's appropriate to set a variant or precedent here, as we have other buildings coming online here soon and hopefully more in the future. And I don't think there's really a hardship associated with the existing sign size. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aguilar. Member Aguilar. Other comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Reed?
I would concur with those last comments. You know, I basically, I don't see the hardship or the exceptional nature that the sign needs to be changed. We want to be pretty careful not to get into the habit of increasing the clutter, however anybody wants to define clutter that goes along that Capitol Boulevard district. And if planning and zoning wants to change the criteria for that sign, then let them have at it. I think we punted on the Grove Hotel and a few of those things back to planning and zoning for like the hotel up the street for this very reason. I'd hate for us to set that precedent. If they want to increase the size of these signs, then I think that's their function. And yeah, it might look right, might look more in balance with the building. You're not going to be able to see it from Capitol Boulevard until you're upon it, whether it's bigger or smaller. There's all kinds of criteria here, but I don't see any of it as a hardship.
Points?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
it looks like the precedent has already been set. The Grove Hotel received a variance, and I believe in the packet there were 2 other signs in the Capitol corridor that received variances. And I understand from the staff presentation that we aren't supposed to compare this current sign or this proposal for the new sign with any other signs. And so I would imagine in the future that this could not be counted as precedent setting.
Any other questions? Mr. Simple, anything from you?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I guess, I can see kind of the point of that we maybe not necessarily setting a precedent here, but on the same hand, we can't use the past signs that have been approved as a reason to approve this one also. I think it boils down to, in my mind, that there's not really a hardship that's being shown. I mean, I understand that it's not visible from Capitol Boulevard, and maybe design-wise it fits better with the building, but being a recommendation to planning and zoning, I feel like if they want to take on a modification to it, or they decide that the variance is appropriate at that level, and that's, since we're just recommending, they could go against our recommendation regardless of what we send to them. But on this, in the case of not using other signs or using other signs, I don't think we can look at anything that's happened in the past, and we just have to take this on a individual basis. And I don't see a hardship or exceptional circumstance other than their sign is too small and they'd like to have better advertising, which I'm sure a lot of businesses would as well, but we hold them to that same standard that's set in the sign code right now.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Well, with that, would anybody like to take a stab at a motion or on a recommendation to forward to planning and zoning?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I would, I could move that we forward a recommendation of denial to the Planning and Zoning Commission for CVA 20-00008.
So moved
Second.
and seconded. Thank you, Mr. Dean. Any discussion on the motion? So kind of from what I've heard is there wasn't particularly a lot of opposition to the sign design, scale-wise to the building, even from the illumination times that they were considering. However, from our side on the committee, have not been able to identify a hardship. And that's why we are forwarding on to planning and zoning this recommendation of denial. Does that kind of surmise people's thoughts?
Yes.
Yes.
If there's no other discussion, at this time I would, Victoria, please call the roll.
Simple,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Marsh,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman.
No.
Motion carries 4 in favor, 1 opposed.
All right, thank you. Next item to be heard tonight is item number 4. It's DRH 20-00383. Location is 1160 North Maple Grove Road. It's for the construction of 6 duplex residential buildings with associated site improvements on a property located in an R3D zone. And at this time, Casey, you want to give us the presentation?
Okay, so hopefully you guys can see the screen as well as the mic. So again, we're talking about item number DRH 20-00383, located at 1160 North Maple Grove Road. So the project is for the construction of 6 two-story duplex structures for a total of 12 units, which is less than the allowed density on the lot, which is 31 units. Property is located in the R3D zone, which is our multifamily residential zone. The project is just allowed by density for use, so it does not require conditional use approval from planning and zoning. And the applicant has agreed to all conditions of approval, but we had some concerns from the public. So for some context, these are some photos taken at the corners of the existing property. This is also a very rough color blocking of the general uses in the area. As you can see, this is a rather mixed use neighborhood. We see a lot of commercial, largely auto sales, some office, as well as a daycare, some multifamily adjacent to the proposed development, as well as some single family development. The proposed elevations break up the facades, reducing the impact of the 2-story structures. We are going to require 3 color palettes. So they show a gray palette in this image. They've also provided some information for a brown tone palette. We're going to require a 3rd one because this development, the size of it doesn't require differing the actual form of the structures. So we find that having different colors help add some more design variety. So when you look at the development from either street, either Irving, Maple Grove, or Susan, we're going to see different colors. The site design has the structures pushed up against the street, as well as an internal drive that the residents would access garages from. Per comments received by ACHD that were received as late correspondence, the applicant is going to be required to restructure part of Susan Drive. Site parking seems to be the main concern for the public, so I wanted to focus most of the attention here. Site parking is found within the Boise City zoning code. It is not within design review guidelines. So it is something specific to Planning and Zoning Commission and not within the jurisdiction or purview of the Design Review Committee to alter. So what is required on this site is 23 parking stalls. For multifamily, parking is determined based off of number of rooms in each unit. Each unit has 3 bedrooms, which require 1.5 parking stalls each, for a total of 18 stalls.
We also require an additional guest parking for one. There's also, if there's assigned parking, we do require an increase of 20%. This is not specifically applicable to this design since they are using individual garages. It's kind of more relevant when it's a flat parking lot, residential or office, but we did do these calculations to ensure that with the assigned parking, we still have that 20% increase. What is provided by the applicant is 24 stalls. So each unit has its own 2-car garage, so 2 parking stalls. In addition to the 24 stalls on site, which meets the required parking, the applicant indicated an additional 6 on-street parking stalls adjacent to the property. Per the multifamily guidelines of the Boise City Zoning Code, we are able to actually reduce the number of required on-site parking stalls if there is adjacent on-street parking stalls. We're not doing that here. We see that the project does have the appropriate required parking on site, but having on-site parking stalls does give the opportunity for some overflow if needed, as long as there's no restrictions on the streets. We did have some late public comments that were forwarded to the committee this morning. They are provided by Karen Spencer, who is the owner of property located at 8865 and 8867 Irving Street. Since they weren't sure if they were going to be able to present today, I wanted to provide some context to show that their property is near the subject property, so their duplex is just 1 lot away. Their comments were primarily concerned about parking, that there wouldn't be sufficient stalls for residents on site. There's also concerns that there's already overflow parking on the street, so those 6 on-street parking stalls wouldn't necessarily be available to the site. There are also concerns about who would necessarily live in this development, concerns that each unit would have 3 vehicles. So those were the primary summary of the comments. We did have some comments submitted shortly before the hearing by a separate member of the public. Unfortunately, they were submitted too soon to be able to accept them into the record and give them to the committee. I believe this individual will be on record and testify virtually today. So staff recommendation for the project is to approve DRH 20-00383 as recommended with the conditions of approval. And with that, I think it's most appropriate to have the applicant speak, and then we can get to some public commentary.
Great, thank you very much. And is the applicant present? Please virtually raise your hand.
Mr. Chairman, he's present in person.
Okay, perfect. And if you would please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Dennis Taggart. I'm the architect for this project. My address is 436 West Broadway Avenue, Meridian, Idaho.
Thank you. Feel free to present what you would like this time.
Thank you for making yourselves available in whatever form it is during this time. It's greatly appreciated. I appreciate staff's help through this, and we really aren't asking for anything outside of what is required. We have the required setbacks. We have no structure over 2 stories, which is compatible with the development directly to our east, which is a combination of 2 stories. It's much less, of course, than the new apartments to the south, which are, I think, 3 stories. Our setbacks are within code. We have significant pedestrian way around the property and through the property. The design is such that we are working on a concept of community neighborhood in each area where the entryways and is on an interior patio as compared to facing the streets. In regard to the parking, you know, we have provided, actually, I think if you consider our full proposal, about 50% more than is actually required by code. We also are showing, as has been our understanding, that the transit stop in front of our project needs a shelter. So we have designed our project to accommodate a typical parking structure there, which of course, in concept, reduces the amount of vehicles and traffic within our project. We think that while there's no guarantee that there wouldn't be 3 adults driving 3 cars, that most people have a typical family, which are 2 people and children. I also feel that in today's, and I think it'll be proven out based on what I'm hearing in the workplace, is there's going to continue to be a work from home option from a lot of people, and a lot of people are taking that opportunity. So I think one of the bedrooms very likely will become a workspace for at least some of the folks. In regard to the off-street parking, I understand that there is, particularly with the new apartments next door, there seems to be, according to the comments that I've seen, a concern about the additional parking on the street. And while that may be true, it is a kind of a first come, first served situation. So if there was a need for offset parking, off-site parking as a result of either residences or their guests, it's no worse than the development to the east of us and to the south of us. We think that it's reasonable that we have been able to provide what we've done. We've bent over backwards to accommodate trash, fire, and pedestrian traffic with the transit stop as well. We think it's a good project for the site, and it's a very visible empty site, which now that we've taken down the old dilapidated house that's there. And I think this is a very, very good and compatible use, a good blend between the 3-story commercial apartment look and the residential look, not only to our east, but to some degree, the single family across the street. We really don't know what else we would be able to do on this site efficiently to serve all, not only the development needs for the people, but also the service needs of fire and sanitary. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions for the applicant from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Taggart. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
At this time, is there any representation from the neighborhood association that's present tonight? If so, please come forward or virtually raise your hand. See Ms. Spencer, Karen. Would Ms. Spencer please state your name and address for the record when you're able?
She needs to hit the unmute button.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. You can hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I apologize. This is my first time doing this, so I apologize. My neighbor, Sarah Christensen, is also scheduled to testify. But I did submit my statement earlier today. And I will say that we do have serious concerns. Our section of Irving Street is literally 1/10 of a mile. And that's 1/10 of a mile with homes, with fire hydrant, mailbox, and driveways. I understand he's saying that all of the restrictions or everything has been met, but I think that we also need to be very realistic. The apartments that were just constructed are 2-bedroom apartments. Those are currently housing at least 3 adults just to afford the $1,400 a month rent. And I don't know if you're familiar with this area. This is not a high-end area. People will be looking out their windows and seeing a 1970s double wide across the street. this property that they're proposing is like creating an island. This small section of parcel will be consumed by this construction, and they are going to be dependent upon our little 1/10 of a mile and Susan, which is a dead end, to support this parking. It's a fairly narrow residential street, and we have children that utilize this street every day to cross and go to Horizon Elementary. We just have serious concerns. They're not providing the parking. I don't believe a 2-car garage can qualify as guest parking. My guests do not park in my garage. And they're not providing anything other than garage parking. So that is our biggest concern. And I'm speaking for everybody on our street. So any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Spencer. Any questions from the committee at this time? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe there's one other that would like to speak tonight. Was that Ms. Christensen? Sarah? Are you in attendance? Please virtually raise your hand. There you are. Sarah, if you would, when you unmute, please state your name and address for the record.
Thanks. I'm Sarah Christensen, and I live at 8875 Irving Street, number 101. So I'm in the condominium. Karen is my backyard neighbor, and the proposed units are to the west of me. Just like Karen, I speak on behalf of several of my neighbors that I've spoken to, and I can guarantee when I have time to go and talk to more, they're going to have the same concerns. When Rosewood was put in, as they filled up, their parking has flowed out onto Susan. Susan is now, there is 0 extra parking on Susan. And when Karen and I went walking last night, at like 8 o'clock last night, where the development is currently being proposed, there were 20 cars just using it as a parking lot. So when this development is going to go in, those cars are going to relocate to Irving Street. And I understand it's first come, first serve, and I know it's a public street, so they'll be coming over. And I would happily, I was the person that submitted her comments late. To be honest with you, I've never, this is my first time at a public hearing, and yeah, it's, so anyway, I have some, I mean, I can tell you on Susan Street, there are about 10 spaces. On Irving Street, there are about 27 spaces, leaving a total number of street parking, 37 spaces, right? I can tell you that right now, there are about 18 residents between Maple Grove Estates, which I didn't even mention. At the end of Irving Street, it goes through, but it ends at Maple Grove Estates, which is a trailer park. And those residents, their streets are so narrow, they're not allowed to park on the street. So they kind of flow back onto Irving Street. 10 of this 18 is, I counted that on Susan because that's already used. I did not count the 20. Here's the 20 that was parked last night. There's 0 street parking. There's 0. And again, I'm just going to reiterate the same points that Karen made. And I'm sorry if I'm just re-saying the same thing, but again, there's 12 3-bedroom units and they only have garages. Let me find my, I would like this committee to consider for a moment all of the 2-car garages that you know of, friends, family, and neighbors. Of those 2-car garages, how many of them have 2 cars parked in the garage? Of the 10 that I knew off the top of my head, I could think of only 1, and they only cleared out in time for winter. The vast majority have 1 car in the garage and 1 bay of storage, with their 2nd car and often 3rd cars parked in the driveway. Tranquility is not proposing to provide a driveway for their residents, or so all other resident cars and all guests. And like Karen said, who has your grandma come park in your garage? They're going to have to go try to find street parking and it doesn't exist. A couple more points that I do want to point out. Like Karen said, from the Maple Grove Estates and just kids around here, we have a lot of kids coming through. Once Irving gets double packed with cars, we have emergency vehicles, we have service vehicles, like our condominium association has a lawn service that comes in. There's garbage vehicles that have got to come through. It just, on behalf of my neighbors and owners who I've spoken to, we have a great concern over traffic and safety of our kids. Just with all the parking that's just not going to be there. I think a traffic study on Irving would show it's a very busy little 10th mile. And I feel the committee would join us in our concerns if they had the chance to see what we see on a daily basis. I just think there's zero parking. And that's that. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks, Ms. Christensen.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask can I ask Sarah a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I'm just curious, and I really am not being facetious here. You live next to an empty lot. Is there something that would go in there that would be acceptable?
Oh, I was thinking about that, and actually I was looking at the designs. I actually think those buildings are beautiful. One of the things I had thought of was, instead of, and I'm not saying this is what they should do. I'm just, if they provided covered parking, well, we have them here, carports, right? Covered parking means that people aren't going to put storage. That means they're going to utilize both spaces. I think my main concern is when you have a garage, you're going to have one car in there and not two. But let's assume for a minute they do have two. I think if they did carports, I know that in the packet I read, taking out one unit, they would need to take out one unit so that if they only had one entrance, I know that I'm getting a little muddled. And they said that they couldn't take out one unit to allow that. And I guess the other proposal I would have made was, could you take out one or two units just to provide additional guest parking / resident parking for their people? I think just the same design, but more parking. I just don't know if that's, this is the first time I've ever spoken at a design committee. So yes, improvement on that site would be beautiful. It's an empty, ugly lot, and there's overgrown blackberry bushes we'd love to get rid of. It's just that we're not going to be able to sustain the parking. And the other thing that I was going to say that I forgot, there's not like other streets. Like if you were doing this over across, there's another empty lot, kitty corner, which is currently zoned for commercial, right? And that's a whole nother issue. But if you were proposing this there are like 35, it's a whole neighborhood of streets where, if my grandma came and there wasn't immediate street parking, I mean, at this point, if my grandma comes to visit, I'm going to have to go move my car across Maple Grove, on the other side of Maple Grove, on those residential streets. And then I'm going to use the crosswalk on Maple Grove to come back and leave that space for my grandma to park in my parking space that's right outside my house. Now, I am part of the condo association. We do have a couple more guest parking, so my grandma's going to be fine. But any of the other residents, or even the guests of this development, are going to have to park, like I said, across Maple Grove. And there is a walkway to facilitate that, but it's a considerable walk. There's no other, just like other little streets that would allow them to park close-ish or even reasonable. Sorry if I got too winded there. It's yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you again, Ms. Christensen.
Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this application? If so, would you please come forward or virtually raise your hand? Seeing none, I would turn this back to the applicant for any rebuttal. If you'd like to have some additional time. Mr. Taggart, are you available?
I am. Thank you for this opportunity. And I appreciate very much not only the concern and the efforts that these two ladies put forth, but it's their home. I get it. And having said that, I don't know how you can punish this development for the sins of others or for the on-street parking that is currently there, which will be competing with the one that we have to provide for our own offset. Yes, there is a electronic stop walkway right directly across from our property. So there is additional opportunities across Maple Grove. Garages, carports. Garages are an issue in some developments, for sure. But when you are having to provide for yourself, you're going to make sure that you provide for yourself. And that means that they may be out competing for those spots. Of course, we're only talking about a guest. But if they choose to try to park on the street and then save the storage, that is an issue that it's, I think, beyond planning and zoning, beyond the developer. And it's a social issue that we're having to deal with. But I don't know how we can ask this developer to impact his income stream by minimum of 20% and 40% if we take away 35% if we take away the 2 units, in order to provide parking that's not needed to meet the code. If we were trying to exceed the code, or if were asking for the reduction because of public transportation for the code, then I think you might have some legs, because that's at the discretion of the planning director. We are not asking for any reductions there, and we're only asking for a single spot to meet the staff recommendation. But there are 2 spots available right up against Maple Grove, which will obviously be a secondary for anybody else looking. And there are 2 spots beyond, back to the east, that are directly adjacent. And I would say that this developer and his tenants have just as much right to compete for those as does the apartments across the street and the condos and the folks there. And again, the fact that there is a squeeze based on the mobile home park is a long-term issue. And it's, again, not addressed in the zoning code to affect us there. We're not responsible for something that's out, anywhere from a tenth if by her measurements to her property, but that mobile home park is about a quarter of a mile away. So I think, as much as I empathize with them, and there are guards, for the children as far as getting across the street, we do have a 5-foot sidewalk on both sides of our property. I think we've met the code and have done our best to have a good compatible project. I just don't think it's right to try to ask this developer to compromise when the others have not been. Thank you very much. May I say one more thing, and I have a couple more seconds. We will be happy to work with that homeowners, and if we wanted to try to do something to limit the parking, like petition you for a parking district by permit or something, we'll work with them to try to figure out a problem, because we're neighbors then. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Well, it's time we'll close the public portion of the testimony and bring it back to the committee for discussion. Any comments or thoughts at this point in time? Probably a similar set of concerns we've had on multiple developments, whether they be in the north end or across the valley. In this case, as kind of stated, they are looks like somewhat in excess of the minimum on our code. Other thoughts or concerns seems mostly to be developed around parking issues.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Simpson.
Yeah, I mean, I can, again, as the applicant had stated, and I think we all understand parking and traffic is a major issue in Boise, regardless of where you live. It always seems like there's always parking problems. That doesn't seem to be something that we necessarily will address at design review, but the applicant has done a really good job of exceeding the parking spaces per unit. The number of units on the site is well below what's allowable there, which I think can't be lost also, that they've already made a concession by limiting the number of units that they're actually building on the site when they could build 31 units on the site instead of 12. And based on the staff's analysis of 6 on-street parking spaces where, one would be required for code for guest parking and 2, maybe is more appropriate with 12. But regardless, I think we need to be careful that we don't want to see Boise develop into is a bunch of parking lots. We need to start looking as a community at, alternative transportation methods. I know this is a little bit further out, but if there's a public transit route adjacent, the applicant's not requesting a parking reduction at all. I mean, it has a lot of things going for it that they could have requested a reduction or limited the number of parking spaces to 1.5 per unit with surface parking. But, there's been some times during the winter where carports fail under snow load. They're not as attractive when in terms of design when you're looking at a site. So I'm going to support the approval of the application because I think that it checks a lot of the boxes of what we're looking for. And I think that having a denser development could be appropriate, but they're keeping it more of a residential scale, right in an area with commercial, obviously education, as well as other residential, multifamily and single family. So I think it's very appropriate.
Thank you, Committee Member Simple. Comments? Other thoughts or motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Reedy.
I move that we approve DRH 20-0033 as recommended in the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommended conditions of approval noted in the project report.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion, folks?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Ms. Suckerman.
is it appropriate to ask staff a question at this time?
Yeah, we can have discussion. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'm curious about, in the staff presentation, about the different browns that are going to be used, and just looking at the pictures, it is not a conventional style building. And I'm just wondering, well, first of all, why we're requesting that they use different browns. I think that's a matter of taste and not necessarily, I don't think it really does anything as far as breaking up massing, because these are not oversized buildings for the site. And then the other thing is there are many different roof lines in these buildings. And I just wanted to know if that was something that the applicant did, and staff, I know this is conjecture, to comply with some of our guidelines, because I'm wondering if we need to change those guidelines so that we don't have so many roof lines in one structure. both because I think looks a little bit busy and because I wonder if it adds to the cost of building and thus to the cost of rental. Sorry, that was a lot in one question.
Worries. So as for the colors, we're not requiring different shades of brown per se. We're requiring 3 separate color palettes. One of the color palettes that they would propose, as you can see up here, are browns. That's just one of the color palettes. That would be one of them. The other ones would have to be different colors. What we see when we request different color palettes, they need to be complementary but distinct. Typically, when we're seeing tans and browns for one color palette, we're then seeing either a grays, or we're seeing some neutral lighter blues, as well as some neutral greens. We see they're complementary, but they also distinguish the buildings. The requirement for this is to add some additional design variety, because we do not have requirements to have different designed buildings on a development this size. So instead of having separate buildings to help to create the design variety, the colors kind of add some design variety from the street. So it's not just one wall of tans or one wall of grays. So that's the justification for the color palettes. And the browns will just be a potential one of the palettes. As for the roof lines, we don't regulate architectural style with the design review guidelines. We do require some modulation. We like to have varied roof lines. We don't require how many different roof lines. We don't have a standard there, but we do like to see varied roof lines because then adds design variety. It also helps break up the massing. So instead of having just one larger structure, having the varied roof lines kind of reduces the impact. And we particularly like to see this when it's surrounded by single family or it's transitioning towards single family homes. Design guidelines just like to see having, we don't require the number of roof line changes, but we do like to see them. Again, we don't require the number of them, but we view it as a positive.
Thank you, staff. Other discussion points? Hearing none, somebody want to take a stab at a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we already have a motion and a second.
Sorry. We do have a motion and a second. With no further discussion, then I would have Victoria please call the roll.
Semple,
Aye.
Rudin,
Aye.
Marsh,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
And with that, that concludes our agenda for tonight. And we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.